Hello, I'm John Roberts and welcome to IABSE in Conversation, where we talk to designers and structural engineers about what inspires them and their life and their career. And now today we're going to try something a little bit different. We have two guests linked by the organisation Bridges to Prosperity, which is very close to IABSE's heart. Avery Bang is outgoing president and CEO at Bridges to Prosperity, has been there for 13 years in that role and is now moving on to the board of directors. And Nicola Turrini has been with them since 2017, working around the world in a number of roles and is now partnerships manager. So as we always do, let's start by talking about how you came to be engineers, and we'll leave Bridges to Prosperity off to one side like an elephant in the corner. And so Avery, where did it start? Was there a particular childhood experience that nudged you into a career of being an engineer, or was it a completely random thought?
Well, John, thank you first of all for having us. We're really honored to have a chat. IABSE has been very dear to the organization of Bridges to Prosperity for years, so it's a pleasure and honor to be here.
Yeah.
I think it's a both and. Being able to be exposed to my father as an engineer made it so it was a little expected, perhaps certainly more than if I hadn't grown up in a household where engineering was in some ways glorified and certainly talked about. But there were points of growing up where I had some hesitation, and I think that's pretty normal. And especially those first couple of years of engineering school, when you're sitting in an auditorium with 800 people, and I love physics, so don't get me wrong, but I'm like one of 800 people trying to follow this off in the distance whiteboard of a physics problem. I remember having the felt experience of questioning the decision to become an engineer. So I'd say maybe the childhood salient story here is that my dad is a structural engineer, and we were kind of road tripping family. So I'm from middle America. There's not a lot of interesting places of holiday that are really proximate, but if you would drive 5, 10, 20 hours, you could always get somewhere cool. So what Dad would do is we'd have this destination. Let's say we're going to Colorado. Well, we would map out, how are we going to stop at all these public works projects and go scampering down the hill and looking, underneath of the abutment back up at the underbelly of a bridge, or how are we going to go to this really signature project? And so that was, I think actually, John, as much as our vacations and where we were going was how we were going to get there. And so I had this that exposure point to how engineers got to see and build things that I thought was pretty cool. So long answer, but that's probably it.
Well, that really does sound. You say it was you were on a vacation. I think he was on a manipulative plan by the sound of that. Nicola, were you being manipulated by your parents as well, or were you? Funny
enough, I was. My dad is a civil engineer as well, so this is coincidence, but apparently a lot of engineers have the same path. So I grew up with my dad building things. He was more in the construction environment than in the design environment, as I have been as a design engineer. But that was, let's say, during my secondary school years, I didn't apply myself too much, and so I ended up finishing high school and having to decide what to do with my life. And they opened the faculty of engineering, civil engineering in Modena, which is my hometown, the same year. And having the dad as a civil engineer, I was like, well, let's take this coincidence and let's make something out of it. And so I started civil engineering almost as a trial and see, as Avery was saying, for me, it was 300 people, and it wasn't 800, but you start with a lot of people, but at a third year, when you have to graduate from the bachelor, it's 20 people left. And it was good to be one of the 20 and to discover that I chose something that I could and I could really enjoy. And that's why I did my master's in structural engineering right away, because yes, in Italy, we tend to do our master's right after our bachelor's and close up this education trip right away, and then think about professional experience afterwards. So that's how it started for me.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I did psychometrics when I joined one company, and the conclusion was I was living the frustrated engineering dreams of my father. So basically, it's just our parents, and it's all their fault, which is good.
It's all their fault.
It's all their fault, everything. So Avery, I listened to your TED talk, which I loved, and there was a strong linkage between the time you spent in Fiji whilst you were at university, the whole university college, Britain American thing. I'm going to be very loose about those words, university. The projects you did when you went back to university, and the fact that you ended up at Bridges to Prosperity. Did that feel planned at the time, or is that something you can now project back onto it as a kind of retrospective rear review mirror thing?
Definitely not planned. I think all great things in life are rarely as you imagine them to be. Like, I think you can have a really well laid plan and then land somewhere close to it, shoot for the stars and aim high sort of idea. But I went to Fiji more out of actually like an existential quarter life crisis of like, here I am, aforementioned 800 people in a physics room, doing very well, but like, is this really what I'm going to sign up for my career to do? And really feeling kind of detached from the impact. And it was a question mark for me if I would actually stay in the industry and if maybe I would, check the box, finish the degree, but go create impact or do something interesting. And I kind of actually had toyed with healthcare. I wasn't sure what, and here's the irony, John, is I actually hate blood. It's one of those things. Like, I'm one of those people that gets a shot and I'll faint. So it's totally irrational, but I was like, maybe I'll do something in healthcare.
I've met several engineers who basically say they much prefer dealing with inanimate materials and the whole idea.
Yes, and I just didn't have the self-awareness, as it goes at 19 or 20, whatever. So I actually went to Fiji with the intention to volunteer in the healthcare space. And, there's some personal drivers behind that, but didn't think that engineering had the kind of help people quality that I now strongly think it does. And so I went to Fiji looking to volunteer for the Breast Cancer Foundation and ended up working with them and spending a lot of time. And it was actually kind of a roundabout way in which I saw how infrastructure and specifically bridges arguably made a much bigger impact on the lives of the people we were trying to serve than even the initiatives we were providing as healthcare professionals. And that was how, kind of a full circle moment, I realized, I could actually help people and do well in the world through an engineering background, but it wasn't by design. I wasn't like getting a one-way ticket to Fiji with the intention of finding bridges and subsequently Bridges to Prosperity.
You literally just ran across it. Well, it's a good story. It's a good story that you tell in your TED talk. And so Nico, the equivalent for you, because as you said, you kind of did your degree, then you do your master's, and then you go and work for, in inverted commas, proper engineering companies. And the fun fact, because the one time I tried it, I was rubbish at it. You actually have got a welding certificate back in 2012, which actually I'm very, very impressed by. What was kind of the arc that took you towards it? Because if quite often if you end up in an inverted commas proper job, to go and do something which evidently is much more heartfelt, which is what you're doing now. How did you get from there to there?
Yeah, that's a good question. And let me specify that the welding certificate, though, is very theoretical. So it's theory behind like the design of weldings, not not the real welding certificate. So I can't lie.
I'm less impressed now.
So, just wanted to put it down. But for me, so my first professional experience came in Spain, not in Italy, after 24 years of studies in Italy. Why that? Because I took the opportunity that the Erasmus scholarship gave me. And that was the major starting point of the whole like next part of my life. That single experience at the end of my master's gave me the possibility in 6 months to discover that there was like an entire world outside of Italy, which was something that I've never even thought about before. So that is the first big step. And then I've worked for FECOR, this consulting firm from Madrid, which is a very renommated one, if we can use that word. And I learned a lot as a design engineer. I started designing bridges, and but at a certain point, after almost 3 years working for them, I was questioning, as Avery was. Somehow, I found a point in which I was questioning what was the point of my work, in particular because I was designing a lot, but touching very much less of what I was working on. And so I kind of started craving a vicinity. Does that work? Yeah, to what I did. And in particular, with that, I started craving some purpose, some clear purpose of my work. And because of a IABSE conference that gave me the opportunity to meet for the first time Bridges to Prosperity and put we call it the bridge bug in my brain back in 2014. So at the beginning of my design engineering career, I had that idea back in my brain that helped me doing some research and then reaching out to them and then finding out that there was a possibility to start as a volunteer and from there take it where I arrived. So that was the process, more or less.
Glad to hear that little seed was put in there by IABSE. That's a good link back for you to be here now.
Absolutely.
We touched on this, but as we were talking before, but yeah, I find it interesting the way different countries have different approaches to education, and here we have two people who've come through two different education systems and have ended up doing a similar thing for different. Actually, parents and wanderlust and seeking something more. Perhaps those seeds are the united factor. Where in the UK we cram a lot. You narrow down early, you cram a lot of education in, and you go out and get experience in industry. In Italy, you seem to linger longer and go your master's straight away, and that's why there's a lot of all the Italian engineers I've ever worked with in the UK always seem to have a lot of theory behind them, which is kind of great. You always go off and they'll sort you out on the theory and the equations. It's always they're very knowledgeable that way. And I had the impression, and this is interesting because already you've kind of said you want to offload something Avery about this. I had the impression that the American system was much more a kind of not quite a random walk, but more of an exploration of where you want to end up, and then you settle in a certain place, a bit like you do in Hogwarts. But go on. I think you ought to start, and then Nico can give his opinion on his route through education.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I really only have a narrow window into that which I experienced. So
we all do. With
a grain of salt, I might complain, and then I'm going to get a bunch of emails from folks around the world saying I've got it all wrong. But my experience growing up in the American education system was there was a lot of flexibility. We really aren't meant to, you're not forced to make a decision until you go to university, really about what is your direction. And there's a little bit of, taking more advanced courses in math and science and these things that would help you in a career for engineering. But most of us don't really make the decision to do engineering until you go to university at 18. But when you get there, the engineering curricula it's called ABET, the ABET accreditation requires much more technical depth at the, I think, sacrifice of some of the more well-rounded subjects that make folks great leaders and communicators. And I understand why, engineering is the only professional degree that you can get in 4 years in the United States. So Nico got out in 3. We are lucky to get out at 4. Most are actually 5 years for the bachelor's here. And, I think for me, I was feeling fairly distanced from all of my peers in the entire university were taking rhetoric. All of my peers were taking humanities. All of my peers were taking, some of the courses that may categorically be more liberal arts, but also help people have a bit more of a rounded perspective. And so I, in fact, added a second degree program, which much to, I'm sure, my parents' dismay, because it added a 5th year of education. I had this Venn diagram.
Serves them right for all that manipulating earlier.
Well, and the funny thing is, my soccer scholarship in uni didn't extend to a 5th year, right? So it actually was purely out of pocket. But neither here nor there. But the Venn diagram of engineering is in the University of Iowa was 128 credit hours. You know, it's just a unit, what have you. Of which I think I had 20 credit hours of overlap with the 120 hours required for a liberal arts studio art degree. So I ended up graduating with, I think, 200 some credit hours where my peers had 128. So I was busy, put lightly, but I think the punchline there was I felt like I left university more well-rounded without sacrificing depth. And I actually also, like Nico, ended up going to graduate school right away in engineering to further deepen my knowledge. So it wasn't trying to be sacrificial, if I'm not trying to get by having a more like skim understanding of the technical requirements of our field. But I do wonder how the American system could introduce us to some of the more tertiary content that ends up making great leaders and communicators.
It's something that's been talked about for many years in the UK, and somehow we still seem to end up with. The trouble is more and more specialisms get crammed in, and suddenly you've got to include these new engineering subjects, you know, even systems engineering, which one of my favorite themes is, you know, that as we make things more complicated, we've now come up with a specialism to simplify.
Well, you know, John, to be honest, like I know ABET here in the United States has talked a lot about requiring graduate follow-on work in order to get licensed. And I don't think that's a bad idea, genuinely.
Yeah.
Because you can get the technical depth. And frankly, I think that in my experience was really where I started to understand how to self-teach. In our system, there's a lot of, you know, you can kind of get through with the maths and sciences, but then in graduate school, you have to be able to learn in your own content. And that has been invaluable skill as I go into the professional realm of just being comfortable pulling up a code book or pulling up a subject matter and feeling like I can get somewhere with it. So I'm a kind of proponent actually of maybe requiring a little bit more time behind the books. But
we all live longer. We need to kind of we might need to take advantage of it. so Nico, what was your sort of thoughts about what was strong and what was weak about the system that you went through in terms of education?
Yeah, I'm going to be talking about a completely different system from the American one that we just went through, because here in Italy, you don't actually have a choice of like puzzling up your career in university. Once you choose engineering, you choose that path. You choose those exams that you're going to have to go through, and that's the way. It's kind of like in civil engineering in particular, it's treated almost like saint faculty, almost like medicine is very much like you have to go through those exact exams, and you have to do well in those specifics if you want to tell people that you're a good engineer after your career. So to make it short, yeah, there is, and it gives, as you were saying, John, it gives you a very more complete and theoretical background at the end of the 5 years. Like I'm talking about a complete cycle of bachelor degree and then master's degree, in my case, in structural engineering. Even if it's in structural engineering, then you still have a strong background, let's say in geotechnical engineering or in hydraulics or in thermodynamics and all of that, which makes you feel at the end of it, at the end of the run, I remember feeling, I think I can do anything I want, but I'm sure I can't do anything of those. You know, like you're in that between in which you have like that minimum background for doing anything, but it's too minimum to be able to be a professional. You still need to choose your way. And that the way that I chose was structural engineering. So remaining in that path from the master's and ending up in FECOR and like doing structural design for 3 years in a row. And that's how then I felt, oh yeah, okay, now I can say I am a design engineer. I can do structures.
It's that one of the big things is also having the confidence to know all the things you can't do, and actually, and when you need to reach out to somebody else. In some ways, that's the biggest power I think I'm developing, is I'm realizing I can do hardly anything at all. But if you normally there's somebody who can help you. So, Right, we're going to have to bring the elephant back out of the room at some point. So let's wheel out bridges to prosperity, which evidently is going to be a big part of this conversation. There's an origin story, which is even before you, Avery. Do you want to just run through that and almost then just talk about how, you know, what was the first roles that you were doing there? Because it'd be interesting to hear the things you've both done during your journeys through the organisation.
Sure. Nico, you can interrupt. We can jump back and forth there. So origin story, I think, is really inspiring in as much as like the idea that our founder, Ken France, was literally sitting at a store getting his tires changed out. And as you do, you like open up magazines just to spend some time. And he opens a National Geographic and it just falls open to this photo of, it happens to be the Blue Nile in Ethiopia. And there's this old bridge. It's a multi-arch span from the 1400s built by the Portuguese. And he sees this photo. That the story is not about this bridge. The story is about the rafting expedition down the Nile and what they find and so forth. But this photo jumps out as a big gap in the arch. Maybe we could link it somehow in the IABSE notes or something later. But he noticed in the backdrop, there's a rope. And there's 6 people on either side holding this rope, and someone is crossing by this method of being, you know, tens of meters above the river. The river clearly is raging. And he's like, why would anyone risk their life to cross at this place? And, you know, the story unfolds and he was a Rotarian, which is a service group that's pretty global. And he, at first, in the beginning, ran it all through Rotary. So he said, could we get a group of Rotarians together to go fix that bridge? And Nico will love this because, like, as a structural engineer, also having worked in the structure space, you know, there was this idea that we could design this from America or wherever you're sitting and arrive there and poof, you know, the solution is better. And I think, Nico, as you would think through, like, what is the obvious solution when you have a break in a big multi-arch span, as you throw a simple truss structure. And the kind of evolution of that story, John, which I'll get to my role a bit later, was that bridge went up. Ken flew there, brought his Rotarian friends. They bolted it on, you know, patched some of the masonry to make sure that it wouldn't have a localized failure, but no engineering, to be candid. You know, it's more of a construction exercise. Without context, didn't realize that the hydro controls upstream actually released a big flood that ripped that out of its hinges and swept it downstream within a year. And, you know, that's a good story from a lot of perspectives. One is you have to know the local context. You absolutely have to work with the local government in the same way, with all respect. If a Brit showed up in my hometown in Colorado, or an Italian for that matter, and wanted to build infrastructure without talking to me or the constituents, there's a gap.
Yeah.
And we learned that lesson day one in the most literal sense. And so Ken, to his deep credit, said, we didn't promise a bridge, we promised access. So even though we finished that bridge and we spent the money and people got across, we made a commitment and we're going to come back. And that was back in 2004. They started in 2003. I think they finished that in 2004. Meanwhile, I'm just this little spunky kid at the University of Iowa. I've never heard about Bridges to Prosperity. And I actually get on a plane to Fiji in 2005. And so when I come across this need for pedestrian infrastructure, and I'm Google searching, you know, who builds pedestrian bridges or trail bridges in developing countries, lo and behold, Ken has just created a website, and is now trying to solve this problem of building bridges in Peru with Rotary. So I call him up and effectively was like, hi, Avery. I don't have an engineering degree yet, so I'm probably not as helpful as you think I might be, but I'm enthusiastic and I'm, you know, wanting to be involved. And as I talk about in my TED Talk, there's a series of phone calls, so persistence matters, where eventually I convince him or compel him that I should go build this first bridge with students. And right then he was, I think, building 2, maybe 3 bridges that year, with some contracting support of some other folks that I consider co-founders of Bridges to Prosperity, Zoe Pacciani and Chris Rollins. And, you know, he raised money from Rotary, send it down there. Zoe would organize it. Chris would engineer it. And hey, I'm a kid with a bunch of engineering students. We want to come help the effort. And, I think the experience of building that first bridge and the challenges of procurement, like where are you going to get cable? That was left up to us. Challenges of constructability. There was no manual. There's no standard. Challenges of design, of thinking about innovative ways to be able to kind of come together with what we knew were the constraints around constructability and material availability. As a 21-year-old was life-changing. And it really set me on a path where at the beginning, I thought, well, I will create this program called the university program. I'll go get a real job because there's no employees at Bridges to Prosperity. So it's not like, who's going to pay me, right? And the reality was I started thinking more and more about that. I get into graduate school, I'm doing my master's thesis on standardizing trail bridge design, specifically with the geotechnical soil structure interaction focus. And it just dawned on me. I was like, if not me, who's going to do this? And this is a huge problem. And so I had a lot of like, I'll do it for a year, I'll create the standard. But I remember calling Ken and I was like, so I know I'm really passionate about getting students involved. I know you invited me on the board of directors at that time. So this is my second bout on the board to help make that happen. But what if I actually worked here? What if I raised money and I only get paid if I can raise the money to pay myself, but I'll start like an operation. I'll be the first US employee and I'll build out this standard and whatever. And he was like, okay, zero risk. You don't get paid unless you raise money. And it sounds like a great idea and you're fairly compelling. So he officially let me do that. And that's exactly what happened starting back in 2008.
But clearly you were just going to phone him up again if he said no. So basically.
Well, persistence is something I don't know where I got that from. I've pondered that many times. But anyway, I just like kind of bulldogged it. I was like, I'm doing this. And was really fortunate. Actually, what Nico will probably speak to in a little bit about his role is right then in 2008, right as I was graduating, right as I was joining Bridges to Prosperity, without any idea where my paycheck was going to come from. And a recent graduate, I had the opportunity to get audience with the CEO of Flatiron Construction. And we co-created what now is a big big part of our organization, which is a partnership between Bridges to Prosperity and Flatiron of like, how could we do a win-win? And in exchange for that, they underwrote a significant part of our budget. I think at that time it was about 30 or 40% of what we were raising through Rotary right off the bat. And then it ended up being, a 5-year commitment. So we actually said, let's build bridges together. Let's bring in the private sector. Let's bring in people who are like the Thaycors of the world that where Nico was at. Let's pull in folks like Arab, which I know, John, you've got a history with. Let's pull folks with Bechtel and Balfour Beatty. And you guys are smarter than anyone we're probably going to be able to, hire, at least when at the budget level we had at that time. And you guys want to give back in the world. And so where I really got started, John, way back in the day, was this imagination of doing two things and doing two things extraordinarily well. One is let's actually create an organization that's solving a problem and doing it with the local government, because we learned that lesson in Ethiopia. But two, let's be a preferred partner to all of these companies in we call it the AEC world, but like the engineering, construction, architecture world, and make it so that it's a collaborative win-win. And there's more to the story, but you're probably tired of hearing it. So that's kind of like the Avery Bang getting involved, being enthusiastic about not only solving the problem, but bringing people along with us, whether it's university students or professionals.
At some time, this must have actually been convincing enough, Nico, for you to go, let's hitch my star to that, hitch my future to that star, or the other way around. What did you see? Why did it catch your eye?
I mean, I would say that the talk that I witnessed at IABSE conference was very similar to this one. It was Avery just like showing you how you can be an enthusiastic engineer and you can be changing the world at the same time. And I was like, oh my God, I want to do it. Like, that's as easy as that. In my head, like it started like, yeah, if you can do it, I want to do it. Like, why shouldn't I do it? And that's been within my head like throughout the FECOR experience, though, that put a big structure on my shoulders, as a design engineer, meanwhile. And so I found myself ready to do it then at the end of 2016. And I left my job and before deciding, I actually took a 2 weeks trip on the Camino de Santiago, like a little spiritual walk to decide what to do with my life. And I came back, I was like, I'm doing it. And
they need more bridges.
yeah, I was actually, I'm pretty bold when I'm writing emails. So I just like wrote a bold email and saying, hey, I'm Nico. I'm a great design engineer. Do you have a work for me? And they were like, maybe we can do a volunteering something. And I was like, okay, I'm going to take it. And I ended up in Nicaragua, which was the first time for me flying to Central America and working and living for 9 months in not the Western world as we know it, not in Europe, not in the US, like in this new reality that really it's been a life experience that has been incredible. Also a professional experience that gave me all the needed experience in building bridges with my own hands, because that was my part of my job, which as Avery said, like we started with flat iron, creating this collaboration with construction and engineering and architectural companies. And when I joined I started at the beginning of 2017, we had, I think, 7 teams from 7 different companies traveling for building 7 different bridges. If it wasn't 7, it was 8. But just so like to give the order of magnitude, I was spending two weeks in Matagalpa, which is a little city in the middle of Nicaragua, doing office work for Bridges to Prosperity. And then I was going 2 weeks camping near the community that we were building the bridge for, and camping with the same volunteers from the companies, and together with our construction team, and together with the third party that is the community that help us building their own bridge. So these 3 elements needed like some kind of coordination, and that's where I was playing my role. So really not design engineering, like it was just like coordinating a bunch of volunteers that generally were coming from construction environments. So they were coming like all in, I'm gonna build this bridge in 1 week, not in 2, and like you needed like to stop these people. Then like the construction team from Nicaragua that like wanted to follow the path that they already knew perfectly, and so needed like me to help like controlling the other parties. And the community that was so the community we work with and we work for are always they're so keen, of course, to change their own life with being part of such a great experience while building it, and then like great project while using it afterwards. And so I had 9 months like that taught me a lot of things. It's been very fun, I have to say, and gave me the part that I needed about construction. I've never constructed anything before as an engineer. I was like just modeling and like doing calculations and reports and everything. So I didn't pull any cable before then. So that part of professional experience was incredible. But personally, I grew up and I realized that was exactly what I wanted to do. And that's why then I used my design experience in order to convince Avery and the rest of B2P to give me a job as a staff engineer. I got lucky enough because the director of engineering was becoming a father for the first time in the same year. So they needed like a support. And with that, I brought that job remotely from Europe for about 10 months. And I remember still, I got a call and they were like, we're growing in Rwanda. We need a engineering person there. Let's call it engineering manager. And for me, as like a technical person and everything. It was the first time I heard the word manager, and I was like, "Whoa, that sounds fancy." So I was like, "Yeah, why not? Sounds good to me."
We're gonna drop you in there, and you're gonna have to find something to manage.
Exactly. It was really like that in my head. Then, like, I got to know it little by little, of course. But yes, that was 2018. So since 2018 up to the end of last year, I've been the engineering manager for our Rwanda program, also supporting the Uganda program at the side. And that made me grow indefinitely professionally. It's been like such a shift and such a overwhelming growth in like my responsibilities, but also like the things that I needed to figure out that made me a new professional, let's say, like a new, as Avery loves to say, leader. Because it is true, leadership is difficult to be taught in university, and you really need to go through a struggle every now and then in order to learn it by yourself. And you can be the only one that can teach yourself leadership is yourself.
I think you've probably skipped over plenty of struggles in there, but no, it's true. I think some of the best leaders I've run across have very got much personal styles, and I can see you both developing your own flavors of it. I'm going to ask. There's a question which has kind of evolved in my mind as you've been talking, because you've kind of touched on it, where maybe this comes out of the fact I've spent a lot of my life working on architectural projects where everybody are complete control freaks. About the fact that actually this got to be this material, it's got to be done in this way, we've got to have this type of person doing it. You're projecting yourself into an environment you necessarily perhaps haven't been before. You are limiting your resource, both from the fact that the amount of money that you can apply and the fact that you can't get geotechnical rigs to go in and drill every single support. So you're dealing in remote places with people with various different amounts of training and experience. As you say, you've got some good experience parachuting in from your partner organizations, but somehow you've got to hold that together. There's words like assurance that would be used around bridge design. You're talking about standard designs, but how do you, so the geeky question is, technically, how do you hold it all together?
I mean, the main answer is safety factors. But also a standard design that has proved in the years to work well. So you put the things together, and doesn't Eurocode and AASHTO rely on safety factors of like 1.5 or 2 as well? Yeah. Why that? Because of the same probabilities, and we just like increase the probabilities of like something not being perfect. So from a design perspective, we increase the safety factors, and we work carefully on something that has been repeatedly proving to be efficient and.
So are you deliberately avoiding innovation because innovation becomes dangerous?
No, actually, we've just been throughout like my engineering manager experience. We've been through the change from timber decking to a steel decking, and that's been the major innovation technically that we've gone through in the last probably 10 years or even more. And it's been a struggle also because you need to take into account pipeline and suppliers and like all those possibilities. So it's been a long thing. So we are definitely going for innovations, just with our timing. Like you can imagine that timings in environment that you were describing as ours can be different from a normal construction site with a normal constructor behind with that kind of budget. And when it comes here, it's obviously we're talking about different timings, but research and development is at the base of what we believe, in particular when we will be talking about a little bit of our M&E department that is like leading into researching about our impact, like the impact of a rural infrastructure with a groundbreaking study that we will talk about a little later. Or research and development, all to say that.
Right. Yeah.
I might build on that because like I think Nico does a great job of explaining like we are definitely not static and innovation's at the core. But John, I think your question also calls on a correct observation. That
well, my next one was going to be about how do you maintain these into the future? So into that.
And this is part of what we think is pretty genius, if we may, is that Nico comes in and like, let's say I'm working somewhere else and I'm like, Nico, I've looked at your drawings. I'm 100% certain we could do it better. We're going to change the design. Part of our role is to say, no, you come and build one of these things, understand the materials, understand the labor, understand the erection mechanisms, then come back and help us improve. But what Nico's coordinating along with the engineering team is not improve it for one bridge, but improve the standard. And so that way, John, as we learn and we iterate, aforementioned with what Nico was able to do with the decking, is we were learning that those were not hitting the same lifespans that we expected. And we were having to go back with governments and work on rehabilitation schemes. And so Nico was able to take that feedback, work with the private sector and the industries of folks who are really quite good in this, in materials and in constructability and so forth, and introduce a new standard. And so, you know, you kind of think, I think of it kind of concentric circles. Like in the beginning, we had one type of design, and then you start to get more and more innovations, but we're not trying to make them all divergent. We're trying to converge those. And so that's a big effort of saying, if we want to go back and maintain 300 unique structures in Rwanda and all 300 have a different design principle, that maintenance and inspection effort are challenging. So it's a both and innovation for the sake of improvement, but not innovation for the sake of disrupting the standard.
I think there's a big worldwide discussion about standardization going on, but actually in some ways you see it through another level of perspective. We'll come back.
Asset management a struggle the world over, and we see it as particularly challenging for us because like Nico's having to go out and work with 30 different district managers, engineering managers throughout Rwanda, and assure them that, like, you know, you have the ability not only to design and build this, but also to maintain it. We're here to support you, but our principle is we're not trying to come in and create the most complicated structure for you to maintain. And so that's, you know, simplification and innovation is actually, those two things are hard to do, especially.
Sometimes it's innovative either not to do something or to simplify it, or and have the courage not to change things. I've got one. I'm going to chuck one question at you, Avery, now, but we'll come back in a moment to what next for Bridges to Prosperity and what next for the two of you. You did an MBA, which is interesting. Now, there's two reasons for doing an MBA. So yeah, and that, yeah, this is partly me, because back 20 or 30 years ago, engineers didn't do MBAs. Yeah, and there's always two reasons. Either of which you're trying to run away from the thing you're doing, and evidently that's not you. You're thinking it was unlocking things for you. What did it add to your armory?
Yeah, I still think it's uncommon, less common to have engineers do MBAs.
I think engineers doing the running away from engineering thing. They use it as that, but yeah.
Yes, and I noticed that, and you know, like in general, my mentors were like, "Oh, you don't need an MBA to do your job or to do the next job you're going to do." But I see it as more of being able to expand my tool belt. And in the Bridges Prosperity realm, we got to the stage where Nico's way better at engineering than I'm ever going to be, and we've got other engineers, both Rwandese and otherwise, that are also fabulously brilliant. Our director of engineering is probably the smartest person I've met in my entire life, and yet the problem still is not being solved globally, just because we have great engineers coordinating a global effort to make the engineering great. And so my personal evolution was a kind of a deepening of understanding. Oop, light went out, not moving enough. We can do a little dance. Is that this is actually a financial problem, and governments can now understand and empathize that, look, Nico and Alan and the team have this great standard design that they totally could implement. But the constraint is financial. And so as I was looking at my ability to lead Bridges Prosperity into that next chapter of how do we really articulate capital mobilization is a core constraint in the system, and do a systems change approach, if you think about systems engineering, kind of in the same realm, it's not just getting the technical specs, it's also making sure you've got the right budgetary and policy things in play. So I decided to go back to business school through that lens of like, this is a public finance issue. And so the intersectionality between public finance and project finance as well, and infrastructure is deep and important. And we need more folks with a technical background to be at the table, not just a bunch of financiers who are saying, well, the economic rate of return of this is blah, 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 blah. And I was like, yeah, but I think there needs to be an intersection. So I put it upon myself to be that intersection, and it's served me, I think, extraordinarily well.
That's good, because in some ways, it's funny. It's only, I'm not a fan of American football, but
Hey.
I always kind of I know. I built a baseball stadium once, but I don't get that game either. So it's kind of like but just that whole idea of running interference and the fact that things get in your way. And in some ways, from what you say, it's a bit like the fact that you just can, put that hand out and keep the ball moving in the right direction as you see that thing coming, because there's so many other things get in the way of good projects, which is good.
That's true.
Yeah. So let's just think about 5-10 years time. First of all, probably from Bridges to Prosperity's point of view, what you mentioned an M&E department, which is evidently starting to expand your core, away from your core, because in some ways, it's the secrets in the name of the organisation. It's very, very focused. So M&E is evidently an expansion. And then also for both of you, where do you think you're going next, and as you reshuffle the leadership pack? I don't know which one of you wants to start on that one.
Nico, why don't you take it? Give an overview of what we're doing on the needs assessment.
Yeah, I can. Well, there is the needs assessment, and there is the research, which are both like gonna increase our possibility to impact the world. Needs assessment first. Rwanda is the first country in which we have been able to sign an MOU with the central government in order to increase the pace of our way to change the country, adding bridges. And that was possible just because we did a big need assessment in 2018, where like we assessed 1,500 bridges, more or less. 1,500 bridge sites in order to select around 300 out of them. And it was our first trial as a big needs assessment. Since then, the same manager that has been running through that is now trying to reach the next level and working with partners like Autodesk foundations in order to create a remote needs assessment. A remote needs assessment that could, throughout tools like Google Earth or similar, of course, through data that can be found or bought through the internet, can give us the possibility to assess the world, basically, and to come up with numbers that we would take like ages, like we would take 20-30 years to go individually and get those numbers down in the table. And now we are studying the way to do it with a click. And so
interesting. I didn't actually ask that question earlier, but of course, in some ways, for Avery, it started because she basically just walked past a bridge in Fiji. I presume that's not the way you choose projects.
No, that's not. The way that we did it in 2018, like to give you a brief summary, was like to train for months a group of assessors, a big group of assessors, to select the best ones of them, and then to send them out through the country to assess the government partners and find out where there was a need for a bridge in rural Rwanda. So going from district to sector to cell, down to each community that requested a bridge. and that broad analysis came up with 1,500 bridge requests. So we went where there was a need that came up, but probably in that way we missed a lot of other places in which nobody just flagged we need a bridge, because like we don't think about it. Like
they weren't connected, so they didn't know that was an option.
Exactly. That's absolutely as easy as that. So this tool now would permit us to technically and objectively define where a bridge is needed, considering specific technical variables, and like considering also population, or like slopes, or like the hydrology behind the river, brought up by a study of the morphology of the terrain. Like there is so much complexity behind it, and there is so much work behind it. So we're talking about a complex thing, but we're going that direction. That's why I'm telling you, like, we're all about R&D.
I suppose I'm somebody who's worked on buildings most of my life, and you think, how difficult could a bridge be? It just goes from A to B. But the fact there's other letters that evidently, and you can, there's all that background complexity. So, and so is that going to be the main, your main development over the next year, being more focused about what you do? Do you see a kind of expansion, and quite often when, because evidently you're still quite hands-on in every project you do.
I mean, I have to say, in order to build thousands of bridges, you need millions of dollars. So
we're going to have to do the links somehow.
Yeah. So that's where the research about the impact and the numbers about the impact of our intervention is gonna come up handy, and lead our way into major fundings that will unlock our possibilities in like intervening in infrastructure throughout the world. A first research happened in Nicaragua back in 2016, I think, Avery. It was a 3 years longitudinal research where the University of Notre Dame and Yale, if I'm correct, studied communities, a number of communities that received the bridge against a control, a number of communities that didn't, to understand to have a statistically reliable results about understanding the economical impact of a bridge. And the results were just outstanding. We're talking though about small numbers. We're talking about 12 communities with a bridge, but like those numbers, we're talking about around 30% labor income increase, and 65% farm related income increase. That was 75%, 60% more enrollment in women in labor. So 60% women getting more possibilities of being enrolled in labor. That's tremendous, and that's just like the tip of the iceberg. And now we're trying to get the major picture featuring our Rwanda program, which instead of building 12 bridges is building 300 bridges in a 5 years time. And so the same universities of Yale, Notre Dame, and I think also Colorado University are repeating the same kind of study. I've been finding the funding for the same longitudinal study of 3 years on a sample of 150 instead of 12. So after these results, COVID permitting, and all of this crazy world around us permitting, when they will come out, they will make sure that every person on earth will clearly state yes, a bridge makes that exact impact, and it's so clear that I'm gonna like help you out. So this is how we are aiming to fund thousands of bridges that we're gonna find out with a remote assessment.
That's good. That's good. It's going to be interesting to get those metrics, because metrics seem to persuade people. So we're heading towards the hour. So let's just ask, as you do this reshuffle, what's next for both of you? Is it kind of are you still going to be hand-on with your theoretical welding certificate, Nico, out there building bridges? And Avery, what does going back on the board mean for you?
So I'm gonna keep going, and I was saying that I've been engineering managers until last year, but as Avery was saying, at the end of the day, the big problem is not engineering, the big problem is money. And so I've always had this big smile, and I've never done anything with it in terms of my engineering career. So it was like, why shouldn't I try
Getting money?
Yeah. Helping out my NGO to do better in a different way. and that's where I am. I joined we call it the development department. So I'm supporting it in two different ways. I'm on the partnership side. So yes, I'm gonna be talking with our partners in order to make sure that they're gonna support our work. But I'm also helping from the field with marketing. So I'm in the free time. I also like taking photos and videos, and so I train some of our stuff to improve their quality of photos. Particularly engineers, we always have an engineer in the field, and if they can do a better photo, we will be filled up with marketing materials. So I did that, and I personally went to take a lot of the materials that we are going to be using this year. So yeah, I'm just studying my ways to support Bridges to Prosperity in the best way, and also to grow professionally in a different role that is really interesting to me.
Yeah, I think actually, putting the amount of experience you have behind that smile will surely extract loads and loads of money. It's also interesting what you're saying about engineers and photographs, because it's very, very true. There's no reason. That's why architects get bigger fees. They take better photographs. We always take, oh, this is a fascinating cable clamp.
It is interesting because you get like these technical drawings, like classes and all of that architecture, like kind of classes, and you are supposed to get some kind of guidance, but then the majority of engineers like don't have a sense of even like horizontal, like the horizon like being leveled while they do construct level stuff. And I'm still puzzled about that.
I know. Well, anyway,
a book to be written about that, Nico. Why engineers cannot take good photos despite being detail-oriented. Unclear.
Over to somebody with a studio arts degree. What's your next step? What's your challenge now to continue to grow?
Yeah, so I mean, as a team, an executive team, probably more specifically, as well as the board, has been tracking towards trying to find ways in which we can localize Bridges to Prosperity more in the communities, and also in the region where we're trying to work. And so, John, in terms of the strategy question, which will tell you a little bit about what I'm doing, is we got really clear, this is a global problem, but we're going to have to prove depth and impact in a few geographies before we can go solve it globally. And so the board really helped us over the last 5 years get more narrowed and focused in East Africa. That is where, if you look at the global need, it's over 40% is on the continent, and a lion's share of that is actually in East Africa, defined by any number of 8 to 10 countries. And so what we said is like, why don't we actually deep dive in East Africa, with Rwanda kind of being the epicenter of the current effort and Uganda being a close second. But imagine our next 5 to 10 years in Kenya and Tanzania and Ethiopia and Mozambique and so on and so forth. And how do we find leadership that know those markets, that have those relationships with governments? Because frankly, this is a policy play. Going back to what Nico was saying, we build all this great evidence. We start to say, wow, guys, not only is transportation infrastructure really catalytic for rural poor people, And that's well known and well researched. And there's a reason why we all have roads and bridges in the developed world. But these in particularly impact communities much more than even the normal roads and bridges for vehicles. Once that's known, we need to be able to get in the table of every single big donor, from the Gates Foundation to the African Development Bank to the World Bank, and frankly, also every government, starting in East Africa. And so we really wanted to have an East African-based CEO, and ideally someone with a lot of context and network in those areas. And so we're actually right now hiring for that position. And the captain obvious question, John, is like, how am I going to get a paycheck when when I'm displaced? And I'm really passionate about the organization and thought deeply and worked with the team about what, if any, role do I have when we get this new leader. And it was decided that it would be great to have me stick around more in the board capacity to help on governance, help on having conversations with folks, supporting Nico, supporting Marielle, folks who are really running the business. I've done it, I've been involved for 15 years. So be available, but also not get in the way. And I think that that's something I'm really committed to, is not getting in the way. So then I was like, so what am I going to do? And I actually just made a jump. A few weeks ago, I joined Graycon Construction, which is a really amazing outfit out of Colorado. And we're focused on a few different areas. We call them groups, but I'm joining the hydropower group, and we're looking at existing hydroelectric facilities and have a number of different companies that we've acquired that work in that space, from kind of general contracting around the dams and infrastructure to turbine expert company to an electrical specialty contractor who have a lot of experience on dams. And the idea is to also get into the development and ownership of those. So I'm moving into the renewable energy space. I'm moving into what is actually where I started, was more in hydraulics, and moving into a space where I can use both the technical background that I have as well as the finance, and kind of keeping in the project finance space.
Well, I've been told it several times that developing a team, one of the definitions of success is being able to leave at the end and they don't notice you're gone. But I got a feeling that you're going to be around in Bridges to
Well, that's a good point.
For a while.
There's ego in all things, right? But I really believe that the team is totally fine without me. I think there was probably a moment where there's like, that girl that talked a lot's not in these meetings anymore. But genuinely, I think that we have a really strong bench, and that's not, doesn't stop at any level. And I think Nico could speak to the team that he's built in Rwanda, all the way from engineering to development. And the folks that we have still on the team are by far and away more capable and complementary skill sets than I think is immediately obvious if you just go to the website. So they're doing great. We are ending our fiscal year here shortly, above kind of our net asset gain targets, and companies are still lining up to join us. So things are going on.
But I'm sure you want more. I think we better leave it there. I think we've just snuck over the hour. I better just say www.bridgestoprosperity.org and send money now, otherwise Nico will come and smile at you more.
I'll be there.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been the first time we've done a three-way conversation. I think it's worked quite well. It's been really, really interesting to hear and all the best of both of you for new roles and morphing roles, and the whole organisation. I'm sure IABSE is going to continue to be close support. The format for IABSE in Conversation comes from an idea by David Knight. IABSE is a group of designers and engineers that are passionate and inspired by the world about us, and to find out more, head to our website at www.iabse.org.uk, and we'll be back soon with another IABSE in Conversation, and thank you for listening.